Hey everyone, today we will be reading Reddit's most horrifying Appalachian stories. Let's begin. Let me tell you what I saw in the Appalachian Mountains. Hello all, originally I'm from West Virginia. I moved around the Appalachian in the Midwest some as a kid. Between the ages of 10 to 13, I lived in rural Kentucky in the foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. I lived with my dad and my grams. We lived in what we call a holler. Think of it like a cul-de-sac in between a set of foothills. We lived in the middle of the neighborhood with nothing but family on both sides. No one lived across from us or behind us because of the foothills. When I moved in, my grams had some rules I had to follow at the time. I chalked them up to the hillbilly stranger danger. When things were like, don't mess around with the wild animals, don't go out into the woods alone, then they got a little weird. Don't whistle. If you hear your name, don't answer and don't go to it. And if you see someone in the woods you might know, no you didn't, and just come home. This experience happened in August when I was 11. My dad and I had mowed paths through the tall grass and berry bushes to the left of the double wide we lived in. We camped out there a lot because it was close enough that we could check on my grams. Now, when you're in the woods, things are louder than you think. You have animal life, bugs chattering, wind through the trees and grass. There was a stream that ran along the road you could easily hear. That night we added a campfire to that list. My dad decided to go back up to the house about a quarter mile to get more beer and to check on grams. Before he left, he told me not to mess with the fire. After a few minutes of watching the fire, things started to get quiet, like real quiet. The wind had all but stopped. Bug and animal sounds were all gone, and the stream sounded like it was miles away. I was getting uncomfortable, even though I'd been left at the campground before like this. Then it started to smell and taste it. It was in the back of my throat out of nowhere. This awful metal tang. After a few more moments of dread, my dad came back. He was mad right away. Said he could smell burning metal coming up the trail. He accused me of tossing beer cans in the fire. I told him I didn't, and even pointed to the fire to prove it. He said there was a storm coming in and we needed to get back home, and he let it go. We left the tent and started our way back. Now, the very cool but very weird thing about lightning in woods this dense is when the lightning hits, it lights up everything like the middle of the day, well up until the front of the trees. After the first set of trees, it's pitch black. There are no street lights, and unless you have lights on your property, it's completely black. So it's pitch black, lightly raining, and other than the dim lights from the house windows, there's nothing. I'm eating watermelon as one dose in August. In the mountains, when the first clap of lightning hits, everything is as bright as it can be. After the second passes, it's black as pitch again. Next clap of lightning comes, and that's when I kind of see it. On the porch, past the yard, over the stream, past the road, and the ditches on either side just past the first line of trees. I could see the silhouette of it. Then it goes dark. This is also when I can start to taste that same awful burning metal. I'm not really sure what I saw, so I just kind of stay still. It's a few moments before the lightning hits again. The figure is now closer, standing side by side to the trees. Then it's back again. I'm standing now, not sure what to do. It's been 20 years to this day, and I've tried, but could never fully describe what I saw. This thing's head wasn't proportioned to its body. The arms were too long and the torso didn't fit right. It was like if you asked a blind person to draw what a person looked like, it just didn't look correct. Once the lightning hit again, the thing is standing in the middle of the road. Not wanting to see this thing get any closer, I go inside. My grams is doing dishes and asks why I'm inside. I tell her I think I saw something. She almost immediately gets my dad on his feet, telling him to shut and lock all the windows and doors. My dad, vaguely drunk, obeys. That night, I sleep with her. The next day, we discover the tent doors torn off. It didn't look like an animal. Things weren't cut or shredded, but looked like someone took and pulled it apart. My uncle, who lived a mile or so up, had all 8 chickens killed. Heads gone, no blood. The next few weeks, all the kids had to wait for the bus with an adult. My dad had to be late for work for almost 3 weeks. Anytime I tried to talk about it, I just had the subject changed. I just figured I was a kid and I wasn't important or real. It wasn't until years later I finally understood. I was in my early 20s and some cousins were in town for Halloween. As I was telling this story, my aunt got irate with me saying, "Don't you tell me that. Don't you put that evil on them." After I couldn't help but think back on all the times I tried to talk about it and how I was shunned. My kid mind not realizing it wasn't as simple as a subject change, but then actively shushing me. Once I started dipping my toes in Reddit, I realized there was a name for this thing. The same name my aunt had called it that day at the party, and other people have seen it. The Goat Man. What bothers me the most is how to this day I couldn't describe any feature, nor have I ever tasted that awful burning metal taste. So friends, if you ever find yourself in the foothills of Kentucky, please remember my Graham's rules. I live in the heart of Appalachia, and this is easily the most terrifying story of one of my experiences. This story may be short or it may be drawn out. I am recounting these events as I type, as it was honestly one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced, and it brings me genuine stress to think about. This happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia and have for my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend. I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when he finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our joint, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet, and as soon as the forest goes quiet, there is a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking, humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain. Almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over, with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I am convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, grasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears of how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely deprived and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I've only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. I know I will receive questions such as what the voice was possibly saying or to explain the area and what happened after. I genuinely cannot remember what the voice was saying, if anything intelligible. I don't know if I could understand it then, and I certainly can't recall understanding it after several years of blocking it out of my memory. All that I recall is that it was a fluctuating voice in pitch, shaking, almost just joining sounds together. After running from the scream at the end of the trail, we ran to the car, which was only about 5 more minutes from the trail, so we got there relatively fast from sprinting. One commenter said, "Oh wow, I feel this in my bones. My uncle, Mom's brother, has had a farm in southeast West Virginia since the 70s, long before I came into this world. Mom is the oldest of 5, and my uncle built a bunch of houses on the farm so family could use it whenever. Some live there and other, like my family, visited often. My mom and older sister and I would go for weeks on end to spend time with family and I always loved it because I have a ton of cousins and was the baby for a long time. So mostly, I tagged along with my cousins and felt extremely safe, like it was my happy place. I don't really remember anything totally out of the ordinary when I was really little, other than I remember an imaginary friend whom I exclusively played with at the farm. Nowhere else, and we moved extensively for Dan's job, so I've lived in many different places. What I remember after age 5 was suddenly being old enough to not have to have someone walk me to and from other houses, which I thought was so cool. So I used to explore. My uncles liked to bow hunt and had taken me a few times not too far into the woods, so I was able to go back on my own, and I find their little tree platforms they had built to hunt from. I thought they were cool, like little tree houses. Your story sounds a lot like the very last time I ever took off by myself in the woods without another family member with me. It was the winter, I wanted to be out in the snow and explore, so I found my way up the mountain. That is what I called it, but in fact it was probably just a massive hill, and into the trees. I couldn't find the spot I was looking for and got pretty frustrated with my 8-year-old self. So I sat down by a creek to catch my breath and figure out where I was. I couldn't have been sitting more than about 3 minutes when something let out a scream I can only describe as blood-curdling. I thought it was a fox most likely until I heard another voice crying, just weeping and wailing, and the sorrow was palpable. My cousins had always told scary stories about Appalachia, and I figured that they had followed me into the woods and were trying to scare the pants off me for shots and giggles. I called out like, "Okay guys, not funny. Okay, I'm going home, enough," and followed my footprints in the snow as fast as I could back to the farm. The screaming and crying didn't stop, stayed consistent as I moved, which really made me convinced it had to be my cousins. I don't think I heard words, just crying and screaming, but it wasn't pleasant. Made my way back to the main house, my uncle's house, which was the biggest on the property and visible from the edge of the woods, and absolutely booked it. Ran full tilt to get to the kitchen door. I remember getting through the door and slamming it behind because I was a combo of terrified and annoyed that my cousins were playing a prank on me. The next closest cousin in age is 9 years older than me, and so I was often the butt of pranks. Well, what did you know, every family member was accounted for in the living room kitchen. The older male cousins and my uncles were in the kitchen putting their snow boots and coats on to come look for me. I had apparently been gone for several hours and they were worried. According to my mom, I was white-faced, my hands were covered in scratches through my mittens. I guess I must have fallen or something. They were so worried I had disappeared. I should add I had set off my aunts to walk to my uncle's and had decided to take a detour and didn't tell anyone. Oops, I was 8 and really didn't think about how that might be bad. Mom said it looked like I'd seen a ghost. I asked if anyone had come out to the woods to look for me. They said, "No, we've been looking at the different houses and we're just about to come look for you because they saw my footprints head into the woods." I told him about where I went and what I heard, and my uncle, whose property it was, said, "Oh, I think you probably ran into the witch." I'm over here thinking, oh, some crazy lady lives in the woods and I probably stumbled near her cottage. Nope, the witch was just what they call the unknown entity that roamed the woods, screaming, crying, mimicking people's voices and just giving people a good old sense of doom and dread. No one had a straight answer about possible folklore or anything like that, but all my older cousins had their own experiences with similar happenings over the years. Scared the living daylights out of me while I've been back to the farm over the years, I can tell you I've never once set foot near the woods tree line. Even as an adult, I was grateful my family didn't think I was crazy, but they said a general rule is not to be in the woods alone. So I listened. To my knowledge, nothing physical ever happened with anyone, and this entity, more of a prankster than anything. But oof, the Appalachia has some wild stuff. I definitely remember some strange stuff happening during the week we had my aunt's funeral when I was 21, and random voices or red eyes or smoke apparitions on the wood's edge. But I never went to check them out after that one incident. I should add that 100% of the family that was at the farm that trip was accounted for at my uncle's house, getting ready to come look for me, so if it was anything other than something supernatural, it was not from anyone staying at the farm. What are your creepiest stories and encounters on this trail? One poster shared, "I was in northern Mass just about a day or so from crossing over into Vermont. It was a bright, clear day, and I was on a long, straight stretch of pines with no real hills to obscure my sight. About 100 yards ahead of me, I noticed a guy with an old-school giant frame pack and short 70s-style gym shorts. Kind of peculiar, but not really surprising. He was stopped on the trail, turned around, saw me, then walked off the left side. When I got to where he was standing, I looked out to where he went and saw nothing. The trees were thin and spread out, kind of reminded me of the Pine Barrens, so it was definitely strange. Never saw him again for the rest of the trail. I'm sure it was just a random guy out section hiking, but his pack and clothes really made my imagination run wild. Also heard stories about a ghost in that particular area, but not sure if they were just telling me that to mess with me after the fact. Haha. Also just past the ferry in Maine, I had a dog-sized black cat dart out in front of me on the trail. Looked it up when I got home, and there's an actual news story on what I saw somewhere else in New England. Still no idea what it was. Maybe a Maine Coon? Cool to see though. Another commenter said, only kind of creepy thing I had happened was I was at Abingdon Gap Shelter just before Damascus. It was a cold night and it had rained all day. It was also a new moon. I got out of my tent probably around 10 p.m. to pee, and the fog was so heavy and with no moon. I lost sight of my tent after walking about 5 feet away. It just disappeared into the dark fog. Luckily, the stake strings were reflective so I could still find it, but the thought of not having my headlamp and getting turned around was scary. It got down to like 30 that night, and I walk up to my tent covered in snow. Another incident that wasn't creepy as much as just dangerous, there was this couple at a shelter in North Carolina. Randomly, they just started fist fighting, like full-on brawl. Then she started yelling at him that she was going to call the FBI and tell them where he was, and that he knows he has federal warrants. They did it again in the morning. Turned out he was armed, which I didn't know at the time. If I had, I probably would have moved on because felon with a firearm with violent tendencies is a bad recipe. Another commenter said, not on trail, but in a trail town during a section hike in Connecticut, Massachusetts. The weather turned bad, and my buddy and I headed into Great Barrington and got a room at a cheap motel. Can't remember the name. At one point in the night, I wake up to see that someone has opened the window and is sticking their head into the room. I sat up in bed and they took off when they saw me move. I didn't think to check that the windows were locked before we went to bed. We were on the second floor, but rooms were accessed from an outside walkway. I got up and locked both windows. Didn't get much sleep that night. I had a terrifying encounter in the Appalachian Mountains, and I'm looking for answers. Let me start by saying that I have lived in the Appalachian Mountains all my life and have experienced a lot of strange things. My family was Irish and settled in West Virginia, but I currently live in the North Carolina portion of these wonderful mountains. That being said, I have learned a lot about what really lurks in these dark woods, but this was like nothing I had ever experienced before. It all began with my golden retriever Ozzy growling like I had never heard before. He literally never growls, so that had me already uncomfortable, but this growl was bone-chilling. It was like he was getting ready to have a fight for his life or something. I took both him and my other dog out at around 11 p.m., and he would not leave my side. I noticed that my workshop door was open, so I walked down to close and lock it up. The entire time he's glued to my side. Ozzy also kept trying to get in between my legs, still growling, and all of his hair sticking straight up like a feral animal. The second I close the door, all hell breaks loose in the woods. It sounded like 50 full-grown men had broken out into a full sprint, tearing through the woods. Trees were shaking and branches falling. In my life, I've never been that scared. We got back into the house before I wet my pants. I got my pistol and mag light to figure out what the heck was going out there. When the dog and I got back outside, we were surrounded by what sounded like people mumbling. It was everywhere. I shined a light all over the woods and couldn't see anything, but the sound was coming from all around. It sounded as if you got a full gym of people to baby mumble. You could almost make out words, that's why I don't think it was an animal. I almost immediately felt sick, like I was having a mix between a panic attack and the full swing of the flu. Back inside the house, it sounded like people were walking around all night. The windows were creaking, and you could clearly hear the sound of shoes on gravel. The mumbling never stopped. Every time I got up to check the house, my feet would touch the floor, and it would get dead silent. You couldn't hear birds, crickets, frogs, or anything. I was terrified and didn't sleep a wink. The air felt thick and evil all night. That's the only way I could explain the feeling. Imagine a soaking wet quilt being tossed over you. That's how I felt. I am looking for any answers as to what this could be. This wasn't like the normal spooky stories my grandma and great uncles used to tell me. One commenter said, "It sounds like you might be dealing with an upset forest spirit. I know most people are suggesting this thing is more physical, but from how you describe it, it sounds more metaphysical, which would explain also why it left you alone. Forests, mountains, rivers, all places like this have spirits that call it home. Places with more powerful spirits are considered sacred. Usually these spirits are happy guardians of these places, meant to protect them, but as you can imagine, with how the earth is treated sometimes, these spirits become angered and restless. What you described matches up with what happens with these spirits are going on a rampage. You did everything right with this. When a spirit is angered, you should hide, stay quiet, and hope it decides you aren't a problem. The fact that your girlfriend is cleansing the house would also explain why it left you alone. The energy around the spirit affects how it acts, so if the area is full of clean energy, the spirit is more likely to leave and go somewhere else. Who knows though, without being there myself, it's kind of hard to tell for sure. Hope it helps." Another one commented, "Wow, this story is super interesting. I live on the southwest Virginia side of the Appalachian Mountains. I had an encounter back when I was 16 years old that was similar. No, I didn't hear any mumbling or anything like that, but my brother, friend, and I were screamed at and chased down the mountain. But I'm in the Appalachian Mountains nonetheless. There's just a bunch of strange things that happen in these mountains. I don't know if it's in the area, the mountains themselves, or what, but I do know this just definitely sounds like a Sasquatch or multiple Sasquatch encounter. I do know that Sasquatch are curious creatures, and they were probably messing around in your shed and pushed your drills to the side or to the back. They might have even been playing with them to figure out what they were. And when you came out and interrupted them with your dogs, that sent them into defensive mode. Most of the encounters that I've heard, the Sasquatch is curious and shy, but the solo males, especially in their young adult age, tend to be very territorial, easy to anger, and sometimes even dangerous. I agree with the person who said that it could have been a pack of bachelors. The best way that I've heard to catch any kind of evidence from these creatures aren't trail cameras, or we'd have all kinds of clear pictures out there of them. I think they can see the infrared and they stay clear of them. On the other hand, Christopher Knoll has had a lot of luck with just putting a small hand recorder out in the woods somewhere, and even multiple recorders. That would probably be my advice to you, original poster. You're probably not going to get any kind of visual evidence. People rarely do, but audio is a whole different story. Be safe, and greetings from the Appalachians. Those who live in or near the Appalachians, what strange, creepy, or scary experiences have you had? One Redditor shared, "My girlfriend at the time and I went camping out in the backwoods of Greenbrier County, West Virginia. We were both 18 years old and about 5 hours to get to the camping spot to stay Friday to Sunday. Friday afternoon, we arrive and make camp. I put up the tent and we took a short hike, and then I built a fire and we settled in for the night. No issues so far. Saturday morning, we wake up and get ready for a day of adventuring. We were busy walking miles and miles, and we ran into 2 different sets of people who were also camping fairly close to where we were. Eventually, the sun surrenders to darkness, and out in this area, nighttime is super dark. We have lanterns and flashlights, but no major issues, except for a few mosquitoes. Shortly after around 1 a.m., we turned in for the night, zipped up the tent, and we were both out pretty quick after a day full of activity. I am a very light sleeper, and it didn't feel like very long after I fell asleep. I heard a soft rustling sound. Whatever was making the noise, it sounded like it was about 20 yards away from the tent. I looked over at my girlfriend, sound asleep. Why can I sleep like that? I figured that the soft rustling sound was a small animal or something else minor, and tried to go back to sleep. Then the soft rustling sound stopped. Then suddenly, in the silence of the night, I heard a thud sound that sounded like a decent-sized piece of wood falling onto the forest floor from a couple feet high, coming from the same direction the soft rustling sound came from. Again, my girlfriend didn't hear anything and was still asleep. I had to pee anyway, so I began to unzip the tent, and my girlfriend slightly woke up and rolled over asking, "Where are you going?" Not wanting to worry her, I just told her I had to pee, then grabbed a flashlight and crawled out of the tent immediately, shining the light in the direction the sound was coming from. There was nothing, just trees, bushes, and total darkness that seemed as if it was swallowing up the beam of my flashlight. I walked around the edge of the campsite looking for anything out of the ordinary, but just as I was about to give up, The flashlight beam caught two reflections out in the dark. They were eyes and they were looking back at me. I stood there with the flashlight beam locked on the eyes. They appeared low to the ground and didn't seem to be moving, but after a few seconds, the 2 points of light moved to reveal it was nothing but a bunny. I laughed at myself, answered nature's call, and returned to the tent laughing at myself. I settled back into my sleeping bag trying to fall asleep, and I was almost there when out of nowhere, I heard a very loud noise that seemed to be coming from only a few feet from the tent. It sounded like a heavy animal's footsteps, like the footsteps of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. I sat up waiting to hear more sounds while images of what could possibly be making these noises in the middle of the night flashed through my head. I remained awake for another hour and a half or so until I finally fell asleep for the night. In the morning, some of those nearby campers we had met the day before walked up to our campsite, asking if we had heard or seen anything the night before. My girlfriend began to reply, "No, we didn't," before I interrupted her and said that I had heard some strange noises. The other campers ran into a wildlife officer who had told them to be on alert because a bear had been spotted in the vicinity. Another Redditor commented, "When I was living in rural Appalachia a handful of years ago, I had someone or multiple people repeatedly harass me at night for over a year. I never found out who it was, but it might have been either an old friend of my grandfather's who was growing weed nearby house, or possibly one of the people from down the mountain who used to dirt bike through the forest in the evening. At the time, I would walk through the neighborhood, which is less a proper neighborhood and more along the lines of 20 houses spread over a half-mile patch of dirt road, and surrounding forest if I couldn't sleep. One night during my usual rounds, I began feeling as though something was watching me. I had seen wild animals during my walks before, including a bear, which, side note, was horrifying, so I decided to trust my instincts and get back to my house as calmly but quickly as possible. The eerie feeling of being stalked followed me all the way to my house. I admittedly was a bit too afraid to really listen for the footsteps of whatever was following me. I was 19 or 20, so the logic, if I don't hear it, it isn't real, totally made sense to me. I got back to my house safely and went to bed that night sure that where I had searched the woods the following morning, I wasn't going to find any trace of what had been tracking me. Unfortunately, I was wrong. When I searched the woods the next day, I found a used condom right at the tree line beside my house. After that incident, I began hearing knocking on the wall nearest the tree line, tapping on the windows, and the sounds of people speaking. I did go check it out a few times, but whatever it was would already be loudly running back to the forest by the time she got around the house. Things got so bad that I was eventually, after months of dealing with these nightly occurrences and my grandparents refusing to let me do anything about it, able to convince my uncle, who lived nearby, to put up a security camera. Unfortunately, it was the kind that only displayed a live feed, and he had it facing my front door instead of the woods. If you're wondering, I absolutely thought this entire setup was sketchy. He also insisted on monitoring from his house, and he insisted that he never saw anyone on camera. It was around this time that someone also sliced through the fabric cover on my grill and stole a storage crate full of my old clothing from inside a shed. Once the batteries in the camera died, my uncle declared that I had been imagining things, despite the damaged property and missing clothing, and insisted on removing the camera from my property. Not even a week later, I was walking to my grandparents' house, which is a little more than 100 feet up the hill from my own house, because I had forgotten to lock their door and they rarely did so themselves. I was in their driveway when I saw something duck behind her porch. I rushed back down to my house and I asked my mother to lock her door instead because I thought that I had seen something. I didn't want to say that I had seen a person because by this point, my uncle and grandparents had me half convinced that my mom and I really were just imagining things. But no, long story short, she had to chase a man in light-colored clothing off their property. She unfortunately didn't get a look at the man's face. On the bright side, he ran into a tree. That last incident happened in November, and my grandfather's friend died that December. The strange occurrences pretty much halted after that point. Though the following year, I heard a cell phone ring outside my window, someone broke into my uncle's truck and rummaged around, and my elderly neighbor had someone pacing her driveway during a power outage. Being from the city, and before that, a railway town, I'm not exactly a stranger to creepy things happening at night or attempted break-ins, but there's something uniquely sinister when these things start happening in the middle of nowhere. People who live in Appalachian mountains, have you ever experienced something crazy? One Redditor said, Alright. I'll just tell you the craziest thing first. So, when I was around 12 years old, I was outside at night and thought I saw a really tall shadow of a man in the front yard. Kind of freaked me out, so I ran inside. The next day, my cousin comes over and tells us they were about a mile away having a bonfire at a friend's house. They heard a whistle come from the woods and decided to go check out what was making the noise. When his friend shone a flashlight into a tree, they saw what they described as a pale, hunched-over humanoid figure up on a large branch. When the light hits its eyes, they flashed blue. This thing proceeded to jump out of the tree and stand up. They said it was about 9 feet tall and so pale that you could see veins running through its body. It had longer than average arms and was thin. It immediately took off running and, despite being so frail-looking, was snapping saplings as it went. This guy's dad is literally the sheriff, so police were called out and scanned the woods but found hide nor hair of this thing. 6 people saw it and swear by it to this day. I saw the tall shadow in the yard the same night around the same time this was happening. Or neighbors down the road said they saw it about 2 weeks later, said it stepped out of the wood line and then disappeared right in front of them, just dematerialized. Anyways, that might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever said in this sub, and I'm sure people are going to say I'm insane. The land there is haunted, and I've posted multiple stories on here about my experiences growing up that are strange, but less dramatic. Location is western North Carolina, around the Gaston-Cleveland county line. The same Redditor commented, "Here's one, still freaks me out. When I was in 8th grade, I used to live with my mom in a camper, which sat in my grandmother's backyard. Living situation was tough, and when you have 2 people and a dog living in a 50 square foot space, things can get annoying. Anyways, the camper was a stone's throw from my grandmom's trailer, and late one night I woke up having some serious stomach trouble. Obviously, since there was no working toilet in the camper, I had to run up to Mama Linda's to use the bathroom. I got out of bed, put some shorts on, and grabbed my shirt because I was in a hurry. When I opened the back door of the trailer, I had my shirt halfway on in case I ran into my grandma. Sure enough, there she stood in the middle of the hallway. She had cancer at the time and had to go to the bathroom many times during the night. She told me to go ahead and that she would wait on me, so I bolted into the bathroom. When I got there, I dropped all my clothes next to the toilet and did my thing. Here's when things get a little crazy. When I was done, I looked over to find my clothes, and yet there were none there. Only my undergarments remained. Thinking this was crazy, I went back into the hall and asked my grandma, "When I came in the house, I was putting on my shirt, right?" "Yes," she said. "Where are they?" I told her I had no idea, so I left out the back door and went back to the camper. On my bed laid my shorts and shirt, neatly folded. I was terrified because I remember having them going up to Mama's house, and she remembered me fiddling with my shirt. Not forget, this was in the wee hours of the morning, and through 3 closed doors. How on earth did my clothes weasel themselves from next to me through 3 walls without me even knowing? People who live near the Appalachian Mountains, what's your craziest personal experience? I'll go first. When I was about 7, my family and our friend's family went on a joint ski trip to the Hidden Valley Ski Resort in Somerset, Pennsylvania. My younger brother and I didn't really know how to ski, so we were both learning. My brother wanted to practice on the Bunny Hill for beginners, so we were practicing there for a while. Note, the Bunny Hill was right in front of the resort while the rest of the ski paths were up the mountain. After a few hours practicing with my brother, I decided I wanted to take the ski lift to try out the other slopes. The friends that we were with were already up the mountain, so my parents let me go up the lift on my own. I didn't have anyone to ride the lift with, so this stout middle-aged lady with brunette hair and a pair of skis offered to go up the lift with me, and I remember being extremely thankful for this because I was scared to go up alone since I've never been on a ski lift before. The woman never said a word, but I ascertained her kindness and reassurance from her expression alone. The ski lift started its slow descent up the mountain, and I tried my best not to look down at the skiers since we were so high up they looked like bugs caught in a light fixture, and I had an irrational fear that the lift would break down on me and this lady would be suspended in the air for hours. But the lift ran its course and I reached the other ski slopes. Now, there were multiple paths you could take by this point. You could take the snowboard paths if you were a snowboarder, and there were multiple paths for intermediate to advanced skiers descending the mountain. My plan was to create a sort of leveling up system for my ski progression, so I'd start with the Bunny Hill for beginners, and after I mastered that, I'd level up to the next slope, Then I'd just repeat the process until we had to leave. I went down the intermediate slope a few times before I leveled up to the advanced path. Now, it was about 8 at this point, and the sun was rapidly setting, so I decided to go up the lift one more time so I could ride the advanced path. This path was extremely steep and consisted of frozen lakes, creeks, and a lot of foliage, so if you crashed, it could be fatal. Well, I ended up crashing on the path itself because I hit a patch of snow that was too thick for skis. My skis flew off, and by this point the sun was already down. I tried to blindly look for my skis, but it was no use. I had no source of light, and the severity of my situation quickly seeped in. It was pitch dark, and I was on an unknown spot of the mountain with no skis. The thing that scared me the most is how quiet it was. The silence was deafening, and I was panicking. Out of nowhere, I saw a light coming from behind me. The light reached me, and it was the middle-aged woman from earlier with my skis in her hands. The second I saw her, a wave of reassurance washed over me. She helped me get up and get my skis back on like a mom would. Then she held my hand and took me down the mountain. When I reached the end of the mountain, the entire staff was looking for me. Apparently, I was missing for 2 hours. I told my parents I know for sure I wasn't lost for 2 hours since only a couple of minutes after I crashed, that lady came to the rescue. To my surprise, my parents questioned me about the lady. They looked at me like I was crazy, so I told them about how she volunteered to go up the ski lift with me earlier, and my friends even saw me get off with her since he went up the lift a few carts before me. My parents are extremely religious, so they told me she was an angel since there was no indication of that woman ever being at the resort besides the 2 interactions that I had with her. I am 21 now, and to this day I don't know what to make of this experience. I know I wasn't in those mountains for 2 hours, and I wasn't the only person who saw that lady that day. I am not at all religious, but how was there no record of this lady being at the resort in 2009? Who knows, maybe she really was an angel. Another Redditor commented, "There's only one specific thing that I witnessed with my own eyes that I count as potentially paranormal. It was a warm summer night in 2005. I was with my friend Josh at his parents' trailer in a very rural area of central eastern Kentucky, near a little town called Clay City. Look it up, y'all, there ain't much of nothing there." Laughing out loud, his parents' yard was typical of most Appalachian homes in the area. Several cleared acres around the house, butting up to thick woods and farmland further back. We were sitting in the basement talking, and Josh asked if I wanted to go out to the yard to smoke a cigarette. As we walked out the basement and into the yard, I lit my cigarette and I looked up. The very first thing my eyes landed on was a bright, white glowing orb that I assumed was the moon. I thought to myself, wow, the moon's really bright tonight. As I looked, I realized I could see the actual moon out of the corner of my eye. A little further over in the sky towards the east, from this other thing, this other object appeared to be similar in size to the moon and about the same color of white, but I had the distinct impression this thing was within the atmosphere, not in space. Confused, I stared at this unknown object for another 10 or 15 seconds. It wasn't blinking, pulsating, wobbling, or moving in any way, sitting as still as a stone. But as I stared, it very suddenly and abruptly dropped straight down, almost like it was falling out of the sky, but before it hit the ground, it disappeared. Blinked out of existence, no noise whatsoever. This startled me so much. I exclaimed, I said, "Whoa! What the actual F was that? Did you see that?" Josh, of course, did not see it, laughing out loud. I was so bummed by that. I explained I sounded like a lunatic because he just missed the dang UFO, although at the time I wasn't fully convinced it was something strange. I was still in denial. It was only after I'd forgotten about it for 8 or 9 years, then revisited the memory after hearing about some other people's sightings, that I began to suspect this really could have been a legitimate UFO. It 100% could not have been a plane, drone, helicopter, balloon, flare, shooting star, space debris, rocket launch, searchlight, reflection, etc. I've searched for a possible explanation for many years and came up dry. This thing was something unusual, of that I am convinced. Ain't never seen nothing like it before or since. I keep looking though, and I've spoke to people from nearby that have seen these ghost lights or orbs themselves. Sometimes they're larger or smaller, sometimes they're different colors, sometimes they're up high in the sky, other times they're down low. I don't think it's swamp gas, laughing out loud. Something strange is afoot in Appalachia though, and I have a mind to believe I'll see one again if I look long enough. It doesn't sound like much of an experience, but truthfully, this one thing changed my entire perspective about unusual sightings and encounters with the paranormal, both here in Appalachia and elsewhere. I was a total skeptic up until that point, and while I don't believe all the stories I hear, I do believe they could be true. Appalachia is strange, y'all. I don't know what to make of some of these things. Looking for Appalachian experiences. One Redditor shared, "Yay, finally I can post this story. I go to a university in Asheville, North Carolina, and in my freshman year here I went camping a couple of times with some close friends. We always went to the same campsite by the French Broad River, pretty cheap and tucked away in the trees. This particular mid-November camping trip was like the first couple. We loaded up on supplies and piled into my friend Jacob's truck to go to a campsite. We set up our tents sometime around dusk, ate food, and dicked around for a while, and finally went to bed after midnight. I woke up sometime before dawn and I had to pee. I bundled up in a second sweater because late fall nights can get very chilly here, and went outside to do my business. When I say that our campsite was right next to the river, I mean it was right next to the river, less than 20 feet from the edge of the water. So I decided to pop a squat behind a tree on the riverbanks and look at the water while I took a whiz. I was still pretty drowsy at that point, and the cold wasn't doing much to wake me up. I was just gazing out at the river, eyes almost glazed over, when I spotted something. A figure was standing in the middle of the freezing cold French Broad River at 3 in the effing morning. I'm pretty sure my pee stream retracted back up into me. The moonlight was fairly bright, but I knew that sleepy eyes can play tricks on you. I squinted my eyes, widened them as far as they could, shielded them and everything. It was definitely a person about halfway across the river, standing waist deep into running water. I couldn't tell in the dark, but I'm sure it was facing our camp. I don't know what gender it was, but the moonlight that reflected off it was pale enough to make me think it wasn't wearing any clothes. Once my brain was fully awake and processing the person staring at me from the freezing river, I hiked my pants up and proceeded to wake up my friends and tell them what I had just seen. We all looked out of the tent, and sure enough, river person is still standing there completely effing still. We huddled back in the tent to figure out what we were going to do, and eventually we packed up our stuff and left before sunrise. River person was there and watching us do it the whole time. Spooky. One Redditor commented, Okay. So I think this one got me the most because of all the scary things there in Appalachia. The real people are probably the scariest. Don't get me wrong. I love the people of Appalachia. I'm one of them. From the moment my crazy German Catholic ancestors decided they wanted to spend their lives fighting with the crazy Irish Catholic ancestors in the southern hills of Ohio over who was better at being Catholic, among other things, and really to say that the folks of Appalachia are scary is meant as a compliment, and I think they would take it as such. You just don't F with people from Appalachia. They're proud of being known as a little crazy and a little hot-tempered. But the fact of the matter is that Appalachian people love their woods and their hills and their isolation, and I think probably the only thing that would scare me more than seeing a ghost standing in a river in the middle of the woods in Appalachia would be if I had to conclude that it wasn't a ghost at all, but a real effing person who was just standing there naked staring at me while I tried to take a pee. Like, it's giving me more collywobbles right now just thinking about it while I'm safe at work. Holy crap, that's creepy. I mean, if we allow the possibility for it having been something supernatural, I might be inclined to say it could have been something to do with Native American folklore. I won't pretend to be an expert on the subject, but it seems like there are many things in Native American lore that still take on human-like appearances, or at least have the option to when they want. Things that can also be alarmingly solid and not ghost-like. Things like skinwalkers and wendigos. And I can't even begin to think about the possibility of that thing having been a skinwalker, because skinwalkers creep me out more than anything in the entire effing world. And it's too late, now I'm thinking about it, being a skinwalker. It's fine, everything is fine. There are no rivers or skinwalkers here at work. Phew. Thanks so much for sharing this story, even if it's freaking me out just a tiny bit, despite the fact that I work in a bright, cheery elementary school. Another Redditor shared, a couple summers ago, I went for a camping trip with some friends just outside of Boone, North Carolina. The campsite was privately owned and all-around awesome place. It's called Blue Bear, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who wants good fun camping with no state officials to confiscate your booze. I think it was the second night we were there. We had acquired a half-gallon of some evil-looking rum. Me and the two fellas I was camping with had opted for one of the more out-of-the-way primitive sites, about a mile hike down the ridge from the main campsites where everyone else seemed to be staying. We knew no one was close enough to complain about our belligerence and had killed the entire half-gallon in no more than 20 to 30 minutes. After that, the night only lasted about 2 hours. We ran around the woods shirtless, shoeless, and brainless until we all passed out. If it sounds stupid, it's because it was. Lots of fun though. Next thing I know, I'm awake, wide awake, and I can hear something moving around probably about 20 yards or so outside of the tent. I feel completely sober and very uneasy. I can feel and hear this thing's presence as it slowly moves through dead leaves and twigs. I'm thinking to myself that this is probably just a deer and maybe at the worst a black bear. Neither would be much of a problem as we didn't have any food lying around or anything other than our tent really. Then this thing let out a call that was unlike anything I've ever heard. It's almost impossible to describe what it sounded like, but I can say it was bird-like, like somewhere between a turkey or an owl or something. It was loud as hell, but what scared me about it was its complexity. It sounded like this thing was speaking a full-fledged language. It cried out a few more times, and each time the call was just as complex, but completely different. It was extremely alarming and put me into full-on fight-or-flight mode. I sat up and began to build up the courage to go outside and face this creature. Then, just like that, it's morning, and I'm laying on my back just waking up. Both my buddies are already up and outside of the tent with a fire going. I instantly start losing it and ask if they've heard the insane stuff that I had just hours before. Neither of them had, and because I was unable to reproduce the sound at all, I couldn't give them any idea of what it might have been. Fast forward to spring break of the next year, I'm going camping again, this time deep in the Nantahala National Forest, which is in the easternmost part of the state and is much more remote than our previous camp. We set up our camp about 8 to 10 miles from the entrance to the park. There were no roads in the area, and the closest civilization was probably 20 to 30 miles away. This time, I'm with 3 guys other than myself. There is no drinking involved, and we are all sober. It's the third night of the trip, and it's cold. Our spring break took place in nearly March, and the nighttime temperatures are more than a few degrees below freezing. Once again, I awakened middle of the night. I want to say it was around 2:30 or so in the morning. Well, damn, if I don't hear the exact same freaky noise coming from just behind me outside of the tent, I'm instantly terrified this time, as I now suspect that some truly strange crap is going on, because I know that this is the exact same creature. This time, I'm determined to catch a glimpse of it, or something, before I never get another chance. I'm in my tent with my good friend and his brother. I go to wake up my friend, and once again, it's like I passed out or something, and I'm waking up in the morning. Obviously, I burst out of the tent and start ranting about this unknown bird creature that I've now had 2 encounters with. No one knows what I'm talking about, and my friend doesn't recall me trying to wake him up at all. I guess I probably could have made his story a little shorter, as it is basically about me hearing a weird noise, but let me tell you, this noise was triggering full-on survival instincts and terrifying me on both occasions. I have spent hours on the internet listening to bird calls and other nocturnal noises from the Appalachian area. I've never been able to find anything that even comes close to the way this thing sounded. Whatever it was, I find it to be an incredible coincidence that I heard it on these 2 separate occasions, miles and miles apart from each other, and at completely different times of the year. If anyone has any good ideas as to what this could have been, let me know. Thanks for reading. One Redditor replied, I saw this and meant to reply. Sorry if I'm too late. Also, I realized this doesn't have much to do with Appalachia, but I live there and it's paranormal, so I'm originally from the foothills of the Appalachians in Kentucky. All my paranormal experiences happened at my grandma's house. There was actually said to be a curse on the men of my grandma's family. I don't know how that curse was ever set, but I do know that my grandpa was nearly stabbed to death. He was a constable, then later lost his leg. My grandma had 3 sons. One died in the war, one died in a car crash, and one nearly died after being crushed by a tree. He survived and went on to live 15 more years before dying just last year of what we believe to be a heart attack. The paranormal stuff started when I was young. Grandma would tell us stories of things she heard or saw. One of the more chilling stories she told us went like this. She was asleep on a couch after having nodded off watching television. She had laid with her head at the end of the couch that was just adjacent to the hallway that led into the rest of the house and bedrooms. She said she woke up to the sound of a thump, followed by dragging. This continued for a bit, getting closer. When she looked up from the couch to the mouth of the hallway, she saw a shadowy figure. She attempted to sit up, but when she looked again, it was gone. I personally believe it was my grandpa, as he never quite mastered walking with his prosthetic. One night she said she heard pots and pans slamming around in the kitchen. Not just gingerly clanging like someone was moving them around or an animal had gotten in, but actual banging together. She called my aunt and uncle, who lived in the house beside hers, to come investigate, but my uncle said he didn't see anything in the kitchen. The one story I was actually involved in still creeps me out. I was about 8 years old at the time, and Grandma was in her mid-70s. We had decided to stay the night at her house. My mom and dad took one bed, my sister took another, and I slept in the bed with my grandma. I remember waking up halfway through the night and seeing boxes of clothes and junk on the ceiling. Only it wasn't the ceiling, it was the floor. The bed had flipped upside down and was resting on the ceiling with my grandma and I still in it. I remember waking her up and we acknowledged what had happened, but I don't remember anything after that until the next morning when we woke up with the bed where it was supposed to be. When we told my family about it, no one believed us. I was 8, she was near 80, so we were easy to disregard. Grandma also told us a story of the little green men. This one was super creepy too, but my dad would mock her about it, which made it easy to play it down. She told us that one night she woke up and saw 3 small green figures with bulbous heads and sharp claws playing on her dresser near her alarm clock. I really don't remember many other details she gave us, but later on in life I heard the story of the Hopkinsville Goblin, and it definitely rang a bell with what Grandma had said. This was before the internet was a thing, especially for my impoverished grandma, and her home was nowhere close to Hopkinsville, so I really doubt she had heard that story before. The final stories come at my grandma's death. We learned that it likely wasn't the house but her herself. When she grew very ill, she was moved from her house into hospice housing across town. I wasn't present for any of the paranormal activities surrounding her final days, but my mom was. Mom and several of her sisters decided to stay overnight for the last several days, before they weren't sure how much longer she would hang on. Mom said one night she was sleeping in the spare bedroom on the floor with her sister, and she woke up to a sensation that she was being choked. She said it felt like someone was holding a pillow over her face. But after a few seconds, it let up. She said she believed it to be her father, making his presence known by reminding her of the time when she was a toddler and had choked on a plastic Easter egg, and he saved her. Finally, on my grandma's last night, my mom and her niece were at her bedside. Grandma was sleeping fitfully and kept moaning out. At this point, she had lost the power of speech, but Mom said it sounded as though she were saying "Mama" as she was attempting to reach toward the foot of the bed. I believe her mom had come to escort her home. Later that night, Mom and her niece had fallen asleep at her bedside, but her niece had been woken up by something. She told my mom that when she woke up, she saw some lights on my grandma's pillow, flickering and dancing. She said they were orange and blue, which didn't make much sense, as there was nothing in the house to make those colors. She looked out the window to see if a car could have been shining in, and there was nothing. I believe her 2 sons who had died previously were also there that night. Finally, when my grandma passed away that night, shortly after 3 a.m., my parents called the coroner to come take her body to the funeral home. It wasn't until later my aunt noticed the anniversary clock had stopped at exactly 3:15. In all the time my grandma had that clock, it had never stopped.